Good evening, everybody. We should be rolling back Plan B, not talking about more restrictions. Go to Plan A and just live our normal lives. We've been double jabbed with good news recently, ladies and gents. Yesterday, we were treated to some stats from Imperial College London and indeed South Africa, which appear to show that Omicron is milder. And now, it's official. The UK Health Security Agency has revealed you are 50 to 70% less likely to end up in hospital with Omicron than other strains. The report shows people catching Omicron are 31 to 45% less likely to go to A&E and 50 to 70% less likely to be admitted for hospital for treatment. There was an article in The Independent today that actually, without any kind of self-awareness whatsoever, outlined the symptoms of Omicron and said that it was difficult to tell the difference between that and a common cold without doing a test. Yeah, so what are we running from? Do we lock down for the common cold? The sad fact, though, is that we currently have hundreds of thousands of people missing Christmas with their families and their loved ones because they came into contact with someone whose symptoms are little more than a sniffle. I thought we were right to be cautious. We were right to be wary, weren't we? We were right to not just let rip. But we're not there anymore, are we? Our government can't have it both ways. We either listen to the science or we don't. And at the moment, the science is shouting, no more restrictions. Certainly, no more mad ones. Bonkers rules and regs that dictated our lives for far too long. Do you all remember that week where we all spoke about whether or not a Scotch egg constituted a substantial meal? I couldn't help but feel that that entire debate appeared to ignore the fact that most pubs don't actually serve Scotch eggs, but whatever, it didn't seem to matter anymore, did it, at that point? You could jog around a park, but you weren't allowed to walk. You could have been running around, torn your hamstring, or wanted to just, I don't know, take a quick break and get your breath back. And you managed to hobble your way over to a park bench. And then out of the bushes comes PC Plod and you've been fined. You weren't allowed to go round to your own partner's house to have sex, but you could book a hotel room and bonk the night away. A caring daughter was arrested for taking her elderly mother out of a care home, you know, the kind of care home where 40% of COVID deaths were recorded during the first wave, and wanted to bring her actually to her own house. Yep, the police got involved there. Gyms were closed so that we could preserve our own health. Grieving relatives weren't allowed to comfort each other at a funeral. And when they did try to put their arm round, for example, their distraught mother, some kind of security guard would come up and wrestle them apart, meaning, ironically, there was even more physical contact than if they'd just let the comforting take place to begin with. We had a situation where church services were cancelled at exactly the time when people needed religious comfort. You had to wear a mask in a shop, unless, of course, you were singing, in which case that was fine. Currently, in Wales, you can't go into the office, but you can move your entire office to the pub, and that's legal. People who were already dying from non-COVID-related illnesses were forced to wither away alone, in total isolation, while their relatives, who also didn't have COVID, had to sit at home and hope a kind nurse maybe held their hand in their final moments. A good friend of mine, his father was in a hospice, terminal cancer. He'd been given a year to live. He didn't have COVID. My mate didn't have COVID. He was given a year. He died in 10 months. And my friend wasn't allowed to say goodbye to his own dad. We told people to eat out to help out and then blamed selfish restaurant and pub goers for spreading the virus. We told children to go back to school and then we locked down the next day. We've just been confronted by data that shows that Omicron could be, potentially anyway, some kind of silver bullet. It could be a way out of this madness. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, more than that. For far too long, our politicians infantilised us. They babied us. We were the helpless, idiotic masses who had to be controlled for our own good. Well, what's just happened now? Boris and Whitty and Javid told us to be responsible, didn't they? They told us to use our own judgment to make sure that we could protect mass public health. And we did that. In many parts of the country, pubs and restaurants were empty. In some parts, they weren't. Some people cancelled Christmas parties, some people didn't. Some people went into work, some people didn't. And collectively, as a nation, we demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt that we are capable of using our common sense and our own personal judgment and, frankly, having control over our own lives. We held up our end of the bargain. The queues for booster jabs looked like a line for a roller coaster at Thorpe Park. Up and down the country, that was. We don't need politicians now to enforce any more restrictions. In fact, it's them who need us. If they expect us to believe that they are at some point going to let us return to normality, that we are ever ever going to be allowed to live with this virus, not in fear of it. And frankly, they have to demonstrate that to us very, very soon. I've had enough of living on Planet Omicron. I want to live on Planet Normal.